Chenla is the Chinese designation for the successor polity of Funan that existed from around the late 6th century until the early 9th century in Indochina, preceding the Khmer Empire. The name was still used in the 13th century by the Chinese envoy Zhou Dagan, author of the Customs of Cambodia. However, modern historiography applies the name exclusively to the period from the late 6th to the early 9th century. Although most of the Chinese recordings on Chenla, including that of Chenla conquering Funan, have been contested since the 1970s as they are generally based on single remarks in the Chinese annals. The history of the Chinese Sui dynasty contains entries of a state called Chenla, a vassal of Funan, that had sent an embassy to China in 616 or 617 CE. Yet under its ruler Citrasena, Mahendra Varman conquered Funan after Chenla had gained independence. Like its predecessor Funan, Chenla occupied a strategic position where the maritime trade routes of the Indosphere and the Sinosphere converged, resulting in prolonged socio-economic and cultural influence and the adoption of the epigraphic system of the South Indian Pallava dynasty and Chalukya dynasty. The origins of Chenla's aristocracy, whom author Michael Vickery called the Dangrek chieftains, are obscure. These were local principalities north and south of the Dangrek Mountains, who left behind the oldest known stone epigraphs in the region, bearing genealogical records that suggest increasing political dominance. The first known princes are mentioned in some early inscriptions. The Sanskrit inscription of Alkantale, Stung province names a ruler Viravarman, who as his name suggests had adopted the idea of divine kingship and deployed the concept of Harihara, a Hindu god that embodied multiple conceptions of power. His successors continued this tradition, thus conveying the idea of a correlation between political and religious authority. The history of the Tianj asserts that shortly after 706 the country was split into land Chenla and water Chenla. The names signify a northern and a southern half, which may conveniently be referred to as Upper and Lower Chenla. By the late 8th century, water Chenla had become dependent on the Thalassocratic Sailendra dynasty on Java and the Srivijaya city-state on Sumatra. The last of water Chenla's kings seems to have been killed and the polity incorporated into the Javanese monarchy around the year 790. Land Chenla maintained its integrity under Jayavarman II, who proclaimed the Khmer Kingdom in 802 CE. Etymology: Chenla, or Zhenla, was the name given in Chinese accounts of an entity that sent tributes to Chinese emperors. The word Chenla, or Zhenla, and likewise Funan are unknown in the Old Khmer language. According to a number of Cambodian sources that originate in folklore, Chenla is the contemporary Chinese term for pure beeswax. Indeed, one of the most valuable and sought-after regional commodities, mentioned repeatedly in Chinese annals. Another approach comes from author Peter Harris. It very likely means defeated chams, since Zun is the word in Chinese for chams. Following Hindu god-king tradition, the king chose the Sanskrit name of a patron deity or an avatar, followed by the suffix varman, meaning protected by, obeying the code of conduct manusmrta, the laws of Manu for the Kshatriya warrior caste. History. Origins of Chenla are originally one of the regional centers of Funan with an unknown degree of sovereignty. Chenla was recognized by a foreign power as a separate political entity at the end of the 6th century, Varman I its independent ruler. Considerable scholarly discord prevails regarding the exact geographic origin, the extent, dynamic and chronology of territorial expansion and in particular, the religious and political center of Chenla and whether or not it consisted of a unified people under a single leader. Late 20th century scholars began cautiously to move away from the established historiographical framework, which had been laid out mainly by George Coedes, who relies on external sources. Chinese annals. Michael Vickery suggests that ancient authors allocated the name Chenla to numerous small principalities and bundled them up as one singular entity in order to classify a larger number of people under the same characteristics, omitting distinctions between individual states. This approach explains why there was a noticeable increase in stone inscriptions during the 7th century. Multiple independent territories would produce their own recordings and written regulations, whereas in one polity only a tiny elite would be allowed access to such tasks. Before historians had begun to analyze and use epigraphic sources in great numbers, all available evidence supported the idea that the center of the Chenla Principality must be located at Mount Fukao, Lingapavata in Champasak Province, Laos, once belonging to the Kampa civilization. The local Vapho stela mentions the name of King Divanaka, King of Kings, yet researchers do not relate the monarch to the Dangrek chieftains. Contrary to the academic conclusions, Cambodian legend tells that the origin of the kings of Cambodia goes back to the union of the hermit Kambu, Sviambuva, eponymic ancestor of the Cambodges, with the celestial nymph Mera, who was given to him by Shiva. The king Strutavarman was born of this couple, who was followed by his son, King Sresthavarman. This king gave his name to Sresthapura, believed to be Vapho. At the end of the 6th century, Bhavavarman and Chitrasena attacked Funan together and subdued it. The obvious fact that Funan and Chenla are vague concepts that do not apply to a tribe, a nation or a people is at odds with the Cambodian legends of origin. Folklore follows an unflinching narrative like that of a single ruler such as King Divanaka, the reconsecrated Maharaja of Mount Fukao, where the people that lived in the region along with the people who came with Divanaka became the forerunners of the prosperous Khmer people. Water and land Chenla. The Tang histories tell us that after the end of the reign period, Shelong Chenla came to be divided in two realms, Lu Chenla or Polao, and Shui Chenla 47, and returned to the anarchic state that had existed before it was unified under the kings of Funan, the first kings of Chenla. On the other hand, Water Chenla was associated with the Mekong Delta and had access to the river and its benefits. But this advantage had its downfalls as it made Water Chenla more susceptible to attacks. Late in the 8th century AD, it was faced war from Javanese pirates that ultimately took over the Mekong Delta and then later the whole Chenla Empire. However, author Michael Vickery asserts that these categories of water and land Chenla created by the Chinese are misleading and meaningless because the best evidence shows that until 802 AD, there was no single great state in the land of ancient Cambodia, but a number of smaller ones. Decline of Chenla. The number of inscriptions declined sharply during the 8th century. However, some theorists, who have examined the Chinese transcripts, claim that Chenla started falling during the 700s as a result of both internal divisions and external attacks by the Sailendra Sajava, who eventually took over and joined under the Angkor kingdom of Jayavarman II. Individually, historians reject a classical decline scenario, arguing there was no Chenla to begin with. Rather, a geographic region had been subject to prolonged periods of contested rule, with turbulent successions and an obvious incapability to establish a lasting center of gravity. Historiography discontinues this era of nameless upheaval only in the year 802, when Jayavarman II establishes the appropriately named Khmer Empire.